A smooth glide down a powdery slope at Pyongyang ski resort in North Korea. People apparently new to the sport giving alpine skiing a try. Among them are Russian youngsters, making up a part of the first known group of foreign tourists inside the state since it recently reopened its border.
It showed itself worthy. We liked it. Great slopes.
Each traveler paid $750 for a seat in what the tour company called a test tour delegation. More trips are planned for March.
It's an amazing country. It's closed off, and perhaps that's what attracts everyone. People say they've dreamed of visiting North Korea all their life. One person says they've visited several dozen countries but have never been to North Korea.
Since coming to power, the Swiss-educated Kim Jong-un has sought to use tourism to attract much-needed foreign currency. In 2019, he oversaw the construction of a new city, complete with a ski resort, hotels, and cultural and medical facilities at the foothills of Mount Baekdu, North Korea's highest peak. It was a record year for overseas visitors, mostly from China. Then COVID-19 hit, his vision was put on ice, and the country became more isolated. Russia, too, has become more isolated globally since invading Ukraine nearly 2 years ago. The war has ostracized Russian tourists from holidaying in many parts of the world, presenting an opportunity for Kim. Last year, he and President Vladimir Putin pledged a new level of strategic partnership.
Welcome to another episode of Actually Existing Socialism. It's your host, Tony. What you just heard is a clip from Al Jazeera News reporting in February 2024 regarding the reopening of tourism to North Korea, also known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the DPRK. This episode features Zoe Stephens, who's been a tour guide to North Korea for many years. Based on her experience, knowledge, footage, and education, Zoe's goal is to present an image of North Korea that aims to humanize the people of the DPRK in a way that is rarely seen in the West. She tells us what is required to visit, what to expect, what are some common misconceptions, and she even describes a fascinating opportunity to stay for a few days with a North Korean family outside of Pyongyang. This episode was recorded in 2023 before the reopening of the border for tourism, so while we speak of the expectation of it reopening, as of the release of this episode, North Korea has officially opened up. Zoe can be found at Zoe Discovers and at Zoe Discovers NK on a variety of social media platforms, and she has her own podcast entitled Zoe Discovers North Korea, which I highly recommend. Of course, I'll have links to all these things in the show notes. I'd like to take a second to shout out all my new patrons by name, Nicholas Epstein, Sam Gardner, and Jazz. Thank you so much for supporting the show. I really couldn't do it without you. So to support the show, you can join at patreon.com/AES the podcast. Another way you can help out the show is to share this episode and by following us on Twitter at AES the podcast. You can also subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform to get new episode notifications. Also, feel free to leave a review if you have time, or even just a star rating. I recommend checking out the back catalog as well when you have the chance. Enjoy the episode. I'm excited to welcome Zoe Stephens, the host of Zoe Discovers, also known as Zoe Discovers North Korea, to our episode today. Thanks so much for being here, Zoe.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So, Zoe, you're actually part of a series I'm doing on North Korea of episodes. I had the chance to speak with Benjamin Weston, the host of DPRK Explained. Yeah, we spoke just a couple of days ago, actually.
Nice.
And I'll be getting to speak to also Monica Macias, who actually grew up in North Korea and was kind of Kim Il-sung's adopted ward.
Yeah, she wrote a recent book, right?
Yes, as you can imagine, I'm incredibly excited for that one. So,
no.
So on Benjamin's episode, we talked about kind of, his channel and DPRK Explained. Moving more towards, of course, the content that you produce, I really want to learn this episode about, how does one travel to North Korea? What does that look like? What does that entail? And what are your experiences in regards to that?
It's really funny, actually, because Ben used to be my intern at Koryo Tours. He used to work in Koryo Tours as well, and that's kind of where I started my North Korea journey, was in the North Korea tourism stuff, and with Koryo Tours, and first traveling to North Korea, and then kind of doing the whole social media stuff. But it's fun. The whole North Korea world is really interconnected. You find a lot because it's not a big industry. Let's just say that. In terms of traveling to North Korea, how do you get around doing that? To be honest, it's really easy as long as you're not a journalist and as long as you don't have an American or South Korean passport. genuinely, it's one of the easiest visas that you'll get out of countries that you might think that visas are hard. It's actually pretty easy, and you don't need to do anything because the travel company that you go with, they do everything for you. So the visa is easy to get, and it's just a case of getting yourself to China and then going in from China. And actually, I always say to people that the Chinese visa is the harder one to get than the North Korean visa. So it's a case of deciding when you want to go to North Korea, finding your travel company first. There are a couple that operate, but Koryo Tours have been working in the country the longest. They were kind of the people who started North Korea travel, and they're actually as old as I am. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. And so you kind of pick your travel company, then you'll pick your tour, when you want to go, what kind of tour you want to go on, and then the travel company do the rest. It's as simple as that in terms of traveling to North Korea.
So I will jump back a second there. You said that Ben was your intern and kind of a narrative connection. He does speak about being an intern at Choreo, and that's how he started. So it's
Yeah,
interesting that you
there you
mentioned
go.
that. um,
Yeah.
so thanks kind of for that, kind of quick summary of what one can expect going on a tour guide to North Korea. So how did you specifically kind of get involved with this? How long have you been working or were working at Choreo Tours?
It's tricky because we have to include the past 3.5 years, almost 4 years, that I have been working but not doing much work in Koryo tours because of the pandemic. The North Korean borders are actually still closed, although in the last couple of weeks it's starting to look more positive in terms of border opening. But I've worked in North Korea, or in this whole industry since around 2019. Oh no, wait, I always forget the years. It's been about 5 or 6 years now. Before the pandemic, I was working there for about 2 or 3 years, and I first went on a trip to North Korea. I think it was 2016. People often ask me, how on earth did I get into this industry? And I think it's just a case of, a lot of little things all coming together, that once you put together, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And basically what it was I first went on a trip to North Korea. Long story short, because I was living in Japan at the time, and in Japan, a lot of people were concerned about the refugee crisis in Europe that was going on, and we had a lot of terrorist attacks. And a lot of my Japanese friends or people that I would meet in Japan would say to me, like, oh my gosh, you're from the UK, so cool. I really want to visit, but it's too dangerous at the moment. And it was this really weird concept of people talking to me like the UK was some kind of dangerous war zone. And I had just come from the UK. Apart from maybe seeing the odd police officer with a gun, which you never see in the UK, you did see that more, but there was nothing crazy about it. It just felt like normal life. And so I found it really bizarre. And eventually I found that it was the Japanese media that was kind of really enforcing this narrative of how dangerous it was. Japanese people didn't even want to fly like in the European air zone. They were really terrified. And I went home one day and I was like, man, okay, if the media can make Japanese people feel like the UK is too dangerous to visit, I want to challenge my own perceptions on a country that I only know about because of the media. And I want to see if it is really that dangerous. Obviously, North Korea came to mind as the first one. And I typed in, can you visit North Korea? And it turns out it's a whole thing. You can visit North Korea. It's a whole industry. And it went from there. I tied in my first tour with a tour to Southeast Asia. I went all the way up and then to Beijing and then into northern North Korea, actually, was my first trip. I didn't go to Pyongyang. I went to a place called Rason. And then there I found that actually, I was right in thinking like, hey, the media might be twisting some narratives here, or the media might be, emphasizing some things, or at least not telling the whole story. Because when I was there, it was nothing like I expected. And it never is when people go to North Korea, it never is as you expect. But I was just really shocked. And the thing that shocked me the most, and I look back on now and I'm like, that's so sad that that shocked me. But there was just like normal people leading their normal lives. And I think a lot of people forget that behind this political narrative of nuclear weapons and dictatorships and stuff like that is the media narrative, that there are people actually there and living their lives. And I just kind of wanted to show that to people. And so I remember thinking at the time, with my like tour leader there, I was like, wow, I could do this job. I think I love travel, I love tourism. And so I was back in the UK, finished my degree, and was looking for a job. And this job popped up on Facebook with the company that I went with. And I was like, hey, you know what? Let's give it a go. And that's basically what led me to getting into the North Korea tourism industry, which then led me to be really passionate about kind of spreading this word, or as I say it, expanding this North Korea narrative. That I'm not saying necessarily that whatever is in the media about North Korea is completely wrong, but it definitely is not the whole story. And so that's what led me to do all the social media stuff and filming in North Korea and stuff like that.
Your story, which makes you really the perfect guest for this show, which is, the goal is to speak to people who've spent significant time in socialist countries, both past and present. And of course, North Korea, for a variety of reasons, is quite unique in that regard. To kind of add on to your point about media narratives, really one could, let's take the US, for example, because that's always a fun example. If one wanted to, if they could spin the US to be the most terrifying place on the planet. In certain states, people walk around.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that is actually accurate. I don't know, but people do walk around with guns.
No, yeah.
There's a significant portion of the people that are quite devoted to their dear leader or former president, and there's a lot of violence and other things like that. So really, it's a very good point you made there in regards to media narratives, and there's always more to the story than is necessarily presented. So with that said, I'm sure once you started telling people either one that you're going to North Korea for the first time, or two, you actually wanted to go there regularly as a tour guide, that they probably started kind of giving you a side eye and like, what? Wait, what? Why would you want to do that? Particularly given again how North Korea is presented in the media.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not your typical beach holiday, let's say that. Although you can go there and enjoy the beaches, but I think a lot of people, you get mixed reactions, and generally it's not a positive reaction. Actually, the biggest reaction is usually, wait, you mean North Korea? Like, not South Korea? But actually, what's funny about this, just as a little bit of I don't know if I'm going too off topic here, but this is kind of what inspired my previous master's thesis. I did it on media narratives and media framing, and it was the difference between framing of North Korea in China and the framing of North Korea in the UK. And the reason that I chose this topic was because when I was living in China at the time, and whenever I would tell Chinese people or Chinese friends or whatever that I work in North Korea and I take tours to North Korea, their reaction would be like, cool, couldn't really care less. Like, all right, cool, that's your job. But then if I tell anyone else, basically, they're all like, oh my gosh, is that safe? Are you crazy? Why'd you do that? It's unethical, blah, blah, blah. And so that got me really interested in why Chinese people just thought that it was, pretty mundane and pretty usual. Okay, you're a tour guide. It got me interested in how the media represents it in China. And it's not this big sensationalized, crazy place to go. They don't have this kind of sensationalist framing narrative in the media. And I think that plays a big part in how we think about North Korea as well. Just to go slightly off topic there, but
No, that's awesome. I did not know that your master's thesis was on that topic. Is there any way to access that paper?
Along with the whole I don't talk politics and stuff like that, I will not make many of my academic publications public until further notice. Yeah.
That is totally fair. So before we get on to speaking about that particular topic, for listeners, I'm kind of making maybe an educated guess on the answer to this question as to why China has a much more positive or neutral perspective on North Korea is, of course, because China played a very significant role in fighting on the side of the DPRK of North Korea in the Korean War. Essentially, I'm not sure that the DPRK would exist if China didn't intervene when they did. To learn more about this, because we're not going to talk about history in this episode, look at the Blowback podcast, which has several seasons now. I believe it's the third season now, which covers the Korean War. So I do recommend people check that out. You just mentioned there that in terms of politics, both foreign and internal to North Korea, you don't really, or the DPRK, you don't really discuss openly, or it's not really the focus of the work that you do. Can you explain why that is?
There is two main reasons why I don't talk politics publicly. And that doesn't mean, I think a lot of people think that I'm naive because I don't consider the politics. It's actually the complete opposite. My PhD is currently in politics and it's always been focused on North Korea and stuff like that. And actually, the reason why I got into politics academically is because I wanted to ignore it in the North Korean field, because everything about the North Korean issue is so politicized. And that is not why I am in the job. I'm in the job because I want to show this human aspect. If you want to know about North Korean politics, if you want to, hear this kind of the story, there's a lot more resources. But for me, the reason why I do the job and the reason why I do all the social media stuff is to go behind the politics, beyond this narrative, and do something else. And for me, in order to ignore this politics, I needed to first understand it. And that's why I decided to go into academia and the politics side of things there. So basically, it's because I want to expand the narrative and not talk about politics, is why I kind of don't talk about it publicly. But there is the other second reason, which is just as equally as important. And that's because, I do self-sensitize everything that I do online, and I want everyone to know that, because it's important that whilst the Western media might not show the full narrative, I am also not showing the full narrative, because that's, it's impossible for me in many ways, because one, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about nuclear weapons and stuff like that, but also because there are certain things in North Korea that inherently you cannot access and that you cannot see. And whilst you can see a lot more than what other people will say, there's still this kind of block here. So it's important that everyone knows that I do self-sensitize what I say, because I want to still be able to be back in North Korea. And I don't think that by doing the same typical vlogs that everyone else does, which sensationalizes North Korea and says how crazy it is and shows these kind of bad and dark aspects to the country, is really helping anything, because, I might get banned from North Korea, I can't go back there again, and then I won't be able to do any of the work that I perceive as doing good. There's that side to it too.
So you're saying that I can't put spooky music over our podcast episode today?
You can do whatever you want. I think. Well, I don't know who out of the North Koreans is listening to the podcast, but I'm sure you might have some people who enjoy it. For me, it's as long as I don't mind how other people represent me, as long as I can kind of be like, well, I didn't do it. That's not what I said.
With that said, I did see one of your most recent episodes on your YouTube channel. You did have several guests on to speak about Women Across the DMZ, I believe it's called.
Oh, yeah.
Can you speak about that?
Yeah, so I suppose getting into politics and political activism, they are two things that, it does sound a bit contradictory if I say that I don't want to get into politics. I suppose with that, I'm talking more as I don't want to give my political opinion. But I mean, when I say political activism, it's more peace activism. And that's the big difference. Women Across the DMZ and Korea Peace Now, they are organizations that advocate for peace across the peninsula. And I think that peace is, if we're going on the big picture, peace is like a universal value that is nice and that's something that everyone wants. But then narrowing it down, it is something that means a lot to me, because it's a big issue that no one's talking about. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people separated from their families because, I don't know, some dudes a few years ago decided to draw across a line of a country, and separated families ever since. Advocating for peace across the peninsula, whilst that, it's getting into politics for me, I'm happy to have that kind of bit of politics out there. I am advocating for peace across the Korean peninsula, and whatever that might be, I think that that's where I stop my limit. Where my limit is that I don't express what that might entail, but also I don't know, it's so difficult to try and figure out what that might entail. But I think one of the biggest things that I also want to get across with that is that a lot of people think, and I also thought, when I first started going to North Korea, I thought that the North Koreans were so hostile and that the last thing that they wanted was reunification, and they were the aggressors and stuff. But when you speak to North Koreans, you very quickly find out that that is the main thing that they want. If you ask them what they want, they're like, oh, we want reunification. We want peace on a peninsula. And I think that's really important to remember as well. It's not about me, and it's about all these people. And I just really want to emphasize how much the North Koreans, they want peace as well.
I really appreciate that thorough explanation you gave there. I think that perspective that you're holding really comes through in your work and it's consistent throughout.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks.
So what are the things that someone's like, hey, I want to, of course, right now, of course, North Korea is closed to tourism, but hopefully that'll change in the near future. What would be the first step a person would take?
So the first step that you would take would be to find your tour company that you want to go with, or at least decide when you want to go to North Korea. There are tours all throughout the year. My favorite tours are, I think my all-time favorite tour is May Day, but New Year's Eve comes in at a close second. But May Day tour, it's the perfect weather, it's the perfect vibe. You get to chill with the locals in the park, drinking and dancing and stuff like that. It's just a great vibe. So basically, you choose a time that's good for you. You want to go in the summer holidays, you want to go around Christmas time, whatever. You choose a tour company, you pay the price, either it's a deposit or whatever that tour company asks for. Then you will fill in a form that will include all the details that you'll need for your visa. And then you send all your documents over to the travel company. And these are not a lot of documents. It's just typical things like photocopy of your passport, some information like where you work. If you're one of these people that you put down like a journalistic role, or if you are Japanese, or if you have South Korean heritage, there are some extra things that you'll have to do, just because there's extra security. And then you make sure you have your visa to China, because that's really important that you get at least a 2 double entry into China, otherwise you're getting stuck in North Korea. And then you get yourself over to China, because that is the main way that people go into North Korea. There are different entry points through Russia. There used to be like other different ones through Southeast Asia and stuff like that, but mainly it's through either plane or train from Beijing or Dandong in northeast China, and it's as simple as that, really. Obviously, once you get to Beijing, your tour company should ask you to attend a mandatory briefing, and in this briefing, it's about an hour long, and they'll tell you all of the do's and don'ts, what to bring, what you can't bring, basically all of the things that you need to know on a tour to North Korea. Again, it's not that much that you'd be expecting, in terms of taking photographs. People are always really surprised. Like, people presume that they're not allowed to take photos unless they're told that they are. But actually, it's the other way around. You're pretty much always allowed to take photos unless someone tells you, hey, don't take a photo. And that there are a couple of other rules to follow and stuff like that. So then it's a case of getting everything prepared, making sure you have enough cash because there's no ATMs in the country, things like that. And then either boarding that flight, just like you would any normal flight, up on the gate to Pyongyang, stuff like that, or onto the train.
That sounds remarkably, simple. That's awesome. It sounds like, I guess, maybe taking any kind of tour, guided tour to any of the country with, of course, the specifics, the briefing that you'd give, I guess, would be different in regards to the different policies that are in effect in the DPRK.
Yeah, exactly. But it's super simple because you are paying for a tour. And I think whilst a lot of people, generally travels that go to North Korea tend to be like pretty well-traveled people and people that hate tours in general because they like to do it by themselves and they traveled so many countries before. So people usually hate the fact that you have to go on a tour in North Korea. But on the flip side, everything is done for you. It's expensive, but everything's done for you. All your meals are included. It's literally the most stress-free holiday in terms of those admin kind of things that you need to worry about.
That's awesome. So I'd recommend people check out, of course, Zoe Discovers and their different channels on different social media platforms. Of course, they'll be linked in the show notes because you go into a lot of detail into all these different steps on your channels, such as do's and don'ts. So I found that one very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
What are some misconceptions people have about traveling to the DPRK as a tourist? You mentioned taking photos. Was there anything else that people generally say or mention?
Yeah, weirdly, a lot of people seem to think or seem to be really surprised when I suggest to them that they have a drink, have a beer with them, with the guides in the evening. Many people seem to think that alcohol is for some reason banned in the country. And I think this purely stems from the fact that it's a strict country and we associate strict countries and strict rules with no alcohol in a lot of situations, because drinking alcohol is a big part of Korean culture, not just North Korean culture, South Korean culture. It's been a big part of their culture for years. That stays the same whether you're in North or South, although the drinks are a little bit harsher in the North, especially the soju. The North Koreans do not like all these sugary, fancy soju things that you might get in South Korea. But yeah, a lot of people are really surprised that you can drink there, and I really recommend that if you don't drink, absolutely fine, but I recommend that you chill out of an evening after the official actual tour itinerary has finished, and you buy your guides a drink or you just chill with them, because for me, those moments where you're relaxing with the guides are times when, you can learn the most about the country. People are really surprised that you can talk to the guides and talk to North Koreans and ask them questions and stuff. And I think a lot of people think that it's somehow illegal for you to talk to North Koreans on the street. And for me, like, this is one of the things where my job becomes important, because I'm not a tour guide that points out things like, this is the Juche Tower, it was built in blah, 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 For me, it's more of like bridging a gap between two wildly different cultures and trying to gain a mutual understanding, because it's not that the North Koreans on the street cannot speak to you, but it's more like, why should they speak to you? If you approach a North Korean on the street, they're going to be like, who is this random foreigner talking to me? They might have never even met a foreigner before. They'll probably be a little bit nervous. They'll probably be, they probably won't speak English, so you have to speak Korean to them in the first place. You also have to consider that they might not want to speak to you. Maybe they're busy on their way to going somewhere else, And so that's a big misconception. Another misconception is also the fact that people live a normal life. I can't stress this enough, how long it takes for people going to North Korea to really grasp this. And even if they're not thinking about it consciously, it comes out in their questions subconsciously. For example, the big one, which is like a big inside joke between the North Korean tour guides, because someone will always ask it on tour, is when you're in the Pyongyang metro and people are like, Zoe, where are all these people going? And I'm like, I don't know. If the Pyongyang metro is packed full of people, or even if it's, a few people on there, someone will always ask me, where are these people going? And I'm like, where do you go when you are on the metro, when you're in the subway? They might be going to a friend's house. They might be going to work. They might be going to school, shopping. I don't know where they're going, but these people are just like normal people. They're not here for us. And again, that's probably another misconception, is that it's not all orchestrated and it's not just a big show and stuff like that. A big example I give for this one is, I can kind of never please people. If I take people to a local bar, if we have an hour or two left in the evening, or if we have like an hour in the day that, we have time to go to a bar, people will never be happy, because if you go to the bar and it's full, too packed full of people, then people will complain that there is no seats to sit in, and they'll also say that they're all actors and we just hired them to be there. If we go there and the bar is empty, then people will say like, hey, like, it's a fake bar. No North Koreans come here. It's just a bar for tourists. And so it's just one of those things where I'm like, guys, I'm sorry that the bar is empty, but we don't pay the actors, they're not actors. We can't pay them to come here. It just so happens that the bar is empty. And so, yeah, those are probably the most common misconceptions, I would say.
In describing that, you're kind of, you made me think of, I enjoy traveling. I've traveled to many countries. And it's like, when I go to a different country, I generally don't expect that people will, like, that this person has to kind of interact with me, or stop what they're doing so that I can ask them some question, a kind of intrusive question about what their life is like, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I just wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important to consider when you're in North Korea, is like to always ask yourself, if you think that something's weird or something's bizarre, then just put yourself in a different country for that second and for what you're thinking about, and then put it in a different context, and then ask yourself, oh, okay, is this still weird? People will ask me, why don't they wave back at you? Like, that's literally, it's a title of one of the videos on my YouTube channel. Because someone actually asked me that one day, and multiple people actually have asked me, why don't they wave back at me? And I'm like, they are not obliged to wave back at you. This weird foreigner coming into their country and waving at them, and then being so entitled as to think like, why wouldn't these people speak to me? Why wouldn't they wave back at me? I'm like, I would not necessarily want to wave back at you if I saw a foreigner in the street waving at me. And it's this kind of weird, I don't want to say the whole savior thing, but it's a kind of weird complex that I think a lot of people go in with, is that, hey, I'm a foreigner. They must really want to know a lot from me because I have all the knowledge of the outside world. I'm wearing jeans and they're not allowed to wear jeans. I'm wearing these like brightly colored clothing. I've got like an iPhone and stuff like that. They'll want to know all the information from me. And people go in like that. And I think it's really important to realize that a lot of the North Koreans, like, they don't really care. And this is probably a really big misconception, is that North Koreans are so thirsty for knowledge of the outside world, and like they'll beg you to know everything. And of course, like in a really nice and polite way, and in a terms of like getting to know people, I suggest when you're talking to the North Koreans to talk about your family, talk about your friends, get to know each other before you get onto like the hardcore topics of politics and nuclear weapons. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're going to tell them something life-changing that they didn't know about the history of Germany or something like that. The North Koreans are incredibly well-educated people, incredibly. And you can see that the most in how they speak English alone or foreign languages. Their education is incredible. These guides speak incredible foreign languages to such perfect native levels, and the resources that they have, or rather that they don't, compared to how well they learn these languages, it's just a really good indicator for how well educated they are in the universities. The funniest thing that I see a lot is when, which kind of really emphasizes this point that I'm trying to make, is over the past few years going into North Korea, there is always someone on tour who will get out their phone and, they're showing pictures of their family or friends, and then they'll be like, hey, do you want to see something on my phone? And they're like, we have this thing, it's called Facebook. And then they'll get out Facebook and start scrolling and showing the North Koreans, and the North Koreans like, oh yeah, Facebook, I know this one. They know it. They've been shown it before. They don't need that they are thirsty for knowledge as healthily as the next human being is thirsty for knowledge. But it doesn't mean that they all want to know desperately about the outside world, that they've been starved for these certain things of information, and, they don't necessarily be saved in that kind of aspect.
It's certainly, one could maybe call that, at least in some cases, an like Orientalist perspective or kind of a colonial mindset to interacting with North Koreans. It's also kind of like this assumption of desire of knowledge. It's like one, it kind of assumes that, everyone outside of North Korea is like super knowledgeable about the world or like outside of their own area or country or whatever, right? It's a funny kind of
I've learned so
contradiction.
much from the I've learned so much from the North Koreans. Like you get them talking about like history and geography and stuff, and I'm like, man, like very smart people.
So I did want to, so sometimes during the episodes, I do kind of pull out an illustrative quote. Sometimes I just find them randomly based on our discussion. And so there's something that you'd said in regards to not being able to kind of please people. It's like the bar is full or it's not full, but regardless of however the bar is, it's something negative about the country or the people or whatever. So this is a quote from Michael Parenti. I'm not saying that you were referencing this quote, but I'm just going to read it off here because it kind of makes the same point on a much wider scale. And so this is from his book, Black Shirts and Reds. He writes, during the Cold War, the anti-communist ideological framework could transform any data about existing communist societies into hostile evidence. If the Soviets refused to negotiate a point, they were intransigent and belligerent. If they appeared willing to make concessions, this was all but a skillful ploy to put us off our guard. By opposing arm limitations, they would have demonstrated their aggressive intent. But when in fact they supported most armament treaties, it was because they were mendacious and manipulative. If the churches in the USSR were empty, this demonstrated that religion was suppressed. But if the churches were full, this meant that people were rejecting the regime's atheistic ideology. If the workers went on strike, as it happened on infrequent occasions, this was evidence of their alienation from the collectivist system. If they don't go on strike, this was because they were intimidated and lacked freedom. A scarcity of consumer goods demonstrated the failure of the economic system. An improvement in consumer supplies meant only that the leaders were attempting to placate a restive population and so to maintain a firmer hold over power. So if communists in the United States played an important role struggling for the rights of workers, the poor, African Americans, women, and others, this was only their guileful way of gathering support among disenfranchised groups and gaining power for themselves. How one gained power by fighting for the rights of powerless groups was never explained. What we're dealing here with is a non-falsifiable orthodoxy, so assiduously marketed by the ruling interest that it affected people across the entire political spectrum. So yeah, that's what came to mind when you're kind of describing, regardless of what people did or didn't do, that they would interpret something negative out of that.
I think it's just really important to, whether it be framed in a negative way, whether it be framed in a positive way, I just think it's one of the most important things that I will always advocate for is that we don't consume media passively, or that we don't take in things passively that's happening, and that we should be critical thinkers. And I think we've gotten so passive and so lazy in, a lot of our lives that, we'll just take things for what's written down. And one of the North Koreans said something to me that was really powerful, that's really stuck with me, and that has kind of inspired a lot of the research that I do. And they said the things that they learn the most from reading the newspapers is not from what's in the newspaper, but from what's not in the newspaper. The North Koreans are all critical thinkers when it comes to consuming their media. And I think people who live in democratic societies get into this whole, we trust, to a certain extent, we trust our media, not that it will necessarily tell us the truth, but on a more deeper level, we trust that our media will cover the important things that are important for us to know, and also represent them in a way that is also the correct way. And of course, the media lies, everyone knows that, but I think it's kind of deeper things that we don't even consider. And that is why, it's kind of dangerous to be passive consumers of the media, but also passive to things that are going on around us. So whether it be, an empty church or an empty bar, and it's framed negatively or positive, it's, thinking about it further. Like, why is it empty and does it matter? Would I be questioning this if it was in another country? Just went a little bit off topic there, but
No, that's great. Thanks so much for that insight. If you look on YouTube or online, different videos that people have gone on these tours have taken, I think pretty much everyone that I've ever seen has been in Pyongyang, of that specific tour there of the city. And I assumed that that's all one could see if one went on a tour there. Again, an assumption made just from the few videos that I'd seen. But from watching your videos, you mentioned something that kind of blew my mind. And this is the homestay tour. I believe that's what it's called. Could you describe or explain kind of what that would look like and what that means and how different it is from Pyongyang?
Yeah, again, one of the bigger misconceptions in North Korea is that you can only visit Pyongyang. Actually, for me, my first tour was not to Pyongyang, it was to Rason, in the very northeast. It's actually a really interesting special economic zone in North Korea. Yeah, you can actually visit all the provinces apart from one, according to my recent knowledge, that one is only because it's only open to Chinese people because they don't have the correct border facilities to deal with foreigners. But you can visit a lot of places in North Korea: countryside, mountains, beaches, and of course the homestay that you mentioned. So this homestay is actually in North Korea's northeast, and it's really special because you don't usually have the ability to just go into a North Korean's house. And that is true. It's not like I've had North Korean colleagues say to me, "Oh, I'd love to have you round for dinner. I'd love to have you around to my house, but I can't." And that's the same, not just because I'm a foreigner, but it's very strict in North Korea. It's not as if you can just easily have sleepovers or people around to your house. That kind of thing is all kind of registered. But in this homestay village, how it happens is it's in a place called Chilbosan, which is a absolutely gorgeous area. It's one of my favorite areas to visit for its hiking, its incredible surroundings, and the homestay is located right next door to the beach. You look out and you can see the beach and you can walk to the beach, and it's lovely. Trying to explain the homestay is tricky. I'm not going to lie and say that it's literally just, walking into someone's home and it's completely normal. It's a homestay village. It's not fake North Koreans that don't live there. It is North Koreans and they do live there and that is their house, but it is a curated homestay village. Not a village, it's like a homestay. Compound sounds too dark. Village sounds too bright. It's kind of like an enclosed area, but that sounds like it's gated and that you can't go out of it. It's an area where you have several houses. I think there must be maybe around 10, give or take a few, houses where families live, and they really do live here. But these are nice families, and they are, of course, nice houses. You're not staying in the most amazing places. Trust me, these places are very basic. They are probably representative of the more well-off countryside people. And you have to remember that you are in North Korea's deep countryside here. People say that in North Korea, you never see the poverty, you never see stuff like that. You only see what they want you to see. But if you use your eyes, you can see a lot more. And I'm telling you, drive into this homestay in North Korea, you see some pretty rough areas. And when you get to the homestay, that's not like it's a castle in the middle of poverty. It is a very simple, basic area with a volleyball court, and it has a dining area, and then it has all the houses lined up. And the houses are very basic. They all have four walls. Some of them have 2 stories. Some of them have 1 story. They have a very basic bathroom, and that means maybe not running water, but I think they all have running water, but not hot, definitely not hot. And to bathe, you'll kind of be using like a bucket and stuff like that. And maybe you'll get a TV, but it's sleeping on the floor, traditional Korean style beds, that kind of thing. So there are so many cool aspects to the homestay that you get that you wouldn't be able to get in South Korea. And that is the traditional Korean culture aspect of it, because it is a little bit like going back in time, maybe no electricity or electricity just for a couple of hours in the day, the traditional, kind of Korean way of washing just with a couple of buckets. And then, of course, the bed, which is you just lay on the ground, kind of like tatami mats, and you just lay on the ground. And that's really nice for me, to be honest. And then you're living with the family, right? So you're having breakfast together. You can help out with the chores. You can help out, I don't know, if they have a son, help out with their homework, help them with the breakfast in the morning. They'll usually have a little plot of land out in the front, like a little front garden. Maybe they're doing maybe they have some crops and stuff like that. Whatever, you can help out with it. But there is the caveat there that they will 100% probably not speak any English. So there is that language barrier there that is very apparent because they really don't speak any English. So it makes all for kind of fun. And then, so you're not left completely to your own devices. You can spend more time in the house if you want, but also remember that they are normal, real people that have their kind of life to go around as well. So we stay there usually for 2 nights, 3 nights, and we plan activities during the day or plan activities kind of around the stay so that you're not kind of in the way of the family as well. So you hang out with them in the evenings and the mornings. I guess you could hang out with them more if you wanted, but again, they have things to do. We plan things either away from the area or in the area. And in the area, it's things like playing volleyball with the local team, really getting down to earth with like more Korean cultural things. For example, playing, shirum, the Korean wrestling. And then also you have a chance to make traditional potato noodles. I'm pretty sure that potato noodles in the north of North Korea, it's usually potato instead of rice. So much more potatoes in the north. They make potato noodles out of the traditional method, and then also making things out of rice the traditional way, literally hammering stuff. And it's really fun to kind of see all these traditional contraptions and stuff like that. And you can learn cooking class. So it's a curated homestay experience that you really are living with North Koreans, but it's not necessarily the life that every North Korean might be living. Hope that answers that question. That's a very long answer.
No, that definitely does answer it. Yeah. And I mean, I hope to, in the future to see more maybe videos or presentations from people who do get a chance to do that, because I feel like there's very little diffusion of that as opposed to the Pyongyang trips.
Yeah, definitely. But it just so happens that, I mean, I get it why people only go to Pyongyang because 1, it's expensive, and 2, well, to be honest, the people that make videos of it, vloggers, they just go into North Korea because they want to make the vlog. And so therefore they will go on the shortest trip. They'll get none of the culture. They'll understand very little of the country. And then they'll come out and say like, hey, it was crazy. I went to North Korea and it gets 1 million views and everyone thinks that it's like that. To go into more remote places like the Northeast and like this kind of area, you generally need a good few more days. And so I think that's probably one thing that's stopping a lot of people from going, and also kind of the fear. But you'd be surprised how many people go to North Korea and then say afterwards that they want to return and see these more remote places.
I know, that's awesome. What is your favorite place that you've been to in North Korea?
My favorite place actually is a place called Nampo, and that is my favorite just because I know that the guides love to go there. And that basically the reason why I love Nampo is it's about an hour and a half out of Pyongyang. It's on the west coast, It's just a really fun experience. You stay there in this hot spa resort. It's very like, don't think it's had anything done it till since the 60s. It's very retro. I love spas anyway, but it's not just because of that. It's because it's so peaceful there. It's so quiet. The guides love it. Everyone gets a little bit loose. It's the one place that, like, looking through all my archived footage, I always try and find photos and videos in Nampo, but I never have any because it's the one place where I also relax and don't worry about vlogging and stuff like that. I just chill out, and you have petrol clam barbecue where the driver literally siphons petrol out of the bus and pours it all over these clams that you bought from the local market, and you all discuss how ill you're going to get the next day, and no one actually gets any ill because you're all advised to drink it with soju, which helps kill off any of that bacteria. No, it's all really good fun, and the guides like it, being there as well. That's my favorite because of that reason. But then I also have other places that I love visiting for the beauty of the place. I love going on hikes in North Korea, mainly because they're so beautiful and so undiscovered. And then also my favorite thing to do in North Korea, honestly, when I'm in Pyongyang, is just go to the cafes and bars and just chill, because that's what I do in any other country that I visit. I love people watching. I just love soaking up the vibe, soaking up the atmosphere. And so that's what I love to do when I'm in Pyongyang.
That's awesome. No, thanks for kind of describing. Again, it's always like hard to, like, even when one hasn't been to a country, it's always hard to like imagine, maybe North Korea even more so. Like, you know, I can maybe, I've been to Paris, but I can kind of imagine Paris from movies, from, you know, things I've seen on the news or whatever. But that isn't the same with the DPRK. It's like, I feel like anything that's ever shown on CNN or the BBC, it's like a military parade, but like nothing
Yeah.
of day-to-day life or any of the tourist things, even those don't really get much focus.
Yep, exactly. And I think like that's why, I mean, people ask me what it's like to visit North Korea. And my kind of one-liner that I come out when I say that, when I answer this question, is that I say that it's pleasantly underwhelming, because people walk in there and they're like, where's the military parades? Where are the rockets? Why doesn't no one care that I'm here? Everyone's like, you get out of Pyongyang train station and you're like, oh, like everyone is waiting for their friends and family and no one's looking at me, and everyone's going about their daily lives and everything's kind of normal in a nice way, but like it's underwhelming at the same time.
What are aspects, so I guess maybe this is a two-sided question. What are some aspects of North Korean culture do you find fascinating? And then also, are there any maybe experiences that you'd like to share that you've had with locals?
For me, there is very little difference between North Korean culture and South Korean culture, and I generally would just call it Korean culture. But one of the things that I absolutely love about it, and that I found with a lot of East Asian cultures, especially as a Brit, is how direct they are. And I've had so many hilarious conversations with the Koreans where they will outright just tell me, hey, Zoe, you're getting a little bit old. You probably want to think about, having a husband and having kids now. Or like, oh, so you got fat, you should lose some weight. And it's just this directness that comes from such a pure hearted good place, but that comes out very in a very different way to people who as a Brit, who even my best friends wouldn't tell me, or would skirt around the topic for about half an hour before trying to tell me to lose some weight or something like that. But I just love it. And for me, like, that's why I love living in China. I love this directness. And so I love that about Korean culture as well. And I know that it comes from a good place. It's not, I know that they mean well and they care about me, and that's why they say these things.
Well, that's hilarious. We'd mentioned briefly Monica Massius at the start. She's a woman who grew up in North Korea, or in the DPRK, and she's recently written a book about it. Even after growing up there, she did end up, and she left at one point. She didn't get a chance to go back, and she went to go see some of the people that she knew there. And she kind of had a similar experience to what you said there. They asked her, "Oh, it's time to settle down, and it looks like you've gained weight," and things like that. So interesting to see
Yep.
that experience parallel there.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm out of questions. Was there anything, before we let you go, that you wanted to say, Zoe, about your channels, about the DPRK in general, or something you'd like people to know?
For anyone that's interested in seeing videos, vlogs, and stuff like that inside of North Korea, you can visit my YouTube, which is just Zoe Discovers. And then I'm constantly keeping Instagram up to date as well at Zoe Discovers NK. At the moment, still posting archived footage from 3.5 to 4 years ago. But hopefully, as soon as those borders open, which I hope will be in the next few months, I'll be back with tons of new footage. And then also in the meantime, I've started up a podcast as well. So on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this to, hop on over to Zoe Discovers. Oh, sorry, it's actually called Discover North Korea, and you can listen to the podcast there. I'm on to about episode 30. So
awesome. Yeah, I highly recommend everyone check that out because I've learned so much from your various projects, Zoe. You've really,
thank you very much.
You've really given an insight that, or I guess a look into a world that often doesn't get shown in the way that you show it, which is often maybe not often, but always in a very kind of neutral way. This is just how people live. This is what's going on here. There's no spooky overlay music, which some may miss.
Yeah.
It kind of adds to the, as you mentioned before, that you want to show the DPRK and the people that live there without imposing a political slant or necessarily imposing a perspective that doesn't necessarily reflect what is actually being presented in what you share. I'd like to thank you so much for being on the show. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot, and they'll learn even more from you by checking out your projects. So with that said, thanks so much for joining, Zoe.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.